Before time carved its first breath into existence, before light pierced the void and the earth had a name, ancient eyes were watching. They stood in the silence before creation, witnessing the birth of worlds not with indifference, but with awe, joy, and sacred duty. This is not a myth. This is the unseen prelude to our reality. If this kind of powerful narrative stirs something inside you, if you're hungry for truth buried deep in ancient texts and cosmic history, then don't just watch. Subscribe now, activate notifications, and come with us on this journey. We're about to uncover what religion, history, and even science rarely dare to touch. This is knowledge meant for those who are ready. They were there, before breath, before dust, before even the whisper of time itself. When the universe trembled on the edge of creation, these ancient beings stood in sacred silence, bearing witness to the divine act that would echo across eternity. Their presence was not metaphorical. It was real, intentional, and deeply woven into the spiritual architecture of our world. They watched as stars were strung across the void like sacred jewels, as galaxies spiraled into motion, not in chaos but in perfect choreography. With every surge of light, with every swirling nebula, their voices rose in awe, singing praises not taught but instinctively born of their essence. They were not passive. They were participants, celestial celebrants of a holy beginning. Scripture doesn't give them names easily. Their identities remain cloaked in mystery, but their fingerprints are in the fabric of Genesis. When the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy. This verse isn't just poetic, it's historical. It speaks of beings older than humanity, created for worship, for guardianship, for communion with the Creator himself. They were the original witnesses, the divine audience. As the blueprint of the world unfolded, they saw form rise from formlessness, light pierce the abyss, and order emerge from the infinite void. They didn't just see it, they celebrated it. Their joy was thunderous, their worship seismic, resonating through dimensions we still cannot perceive. But the silence of Scripture on them isn't omission, it's intentional reverence. These weren't characters in a myth, they were the sacred elite. Their reality is hidden, not to erase them, but to guard what only seekers are worthy of discovering. And you, right now, are walking that path. You are not just listening, you're remembering. This is a call not just to curiosity, but to awakening. Open your heart to what your soul already knows. You were meant to question. You were meant to feel that pull when you hear these ancient truths. These aren't stories, they're echoes, and the echoes are calling you home. Don't turn away. Don't scroll past. Stay. Because everything that comes next will shatter what you thought you knew about angels, creation, and the eternal conflict between light and darkness. The divine realm is not chaotic. It is structured, ordered, and governed by laws older than any throne of man. The celestial hosts are not random spirits. Each has a name, a function, a place in a divine hierarchy designed with terrifying precision. This is not mythology. This is the structure of heaven's government. At the top, closest to the throne, dwell the cherubim, beings of glory too immense for human comprehension. They are not baby-faced angels of Renaissance art, but fearsome entities crowned with multiple wings and faces, lion, eagle, ox, and man, embodying the full spectrum of creation's wisdom and power. They do not speak unless commanded. They move when worlds must change. Beside them, seraphim burn, literally. They are the fiery ones consumed by the glory of God, endlessly declaring, "Holy, holy, holy," with voices that split the heavens. They do not act. They adore. They do not question. They proclaim. Their presence alone redefines what holiness means in the highest court. Below them, but no less vital, stand the archangels. Michael, the warrior, the general, the protector of Israel. Gabriel, the voice of God, bearer of divine messages that alter destinies. These are not characters for decoration. When they speak, kings fall. When they act, history bends. And then there are the angels, innumerable, invisible, and intentional. Each sent on mission, each bound by divine purpose. They walk among us, watch us, intervene when called. Not fantasies, not dreams, messengers, warriors, guardians of souls and kingdoms. Paul spoke of them in layers, principalities, powers, thrones, dominions. These are not symbolic roles. They are ranks in a government we can barely grasp, a spiritual bureaucracy more ancient and efficient than anything on Earth. If that sounds terrifying, it should, because it means you're never alone. Ever. Understand this. What happens on Earth reflects a reality already set in heaven. You are not random. Your life, your purpose, your battles, they echo something greater, something written in celestial ink long before your first breath. This knowledge demands reverence. It demands responsibility. But even in such an ordered kingdom, something unimaginable occurred. A fracture, a rebellion, not from below, but from within. One of the highest, most adorned, most trusted beings let pride poison his soul. He did not fall because he was weak. He fell because he dared to rise. He was called the Morning Star, radiant and wise, a being of unmatched beauty, wisdom, and rank, until the moment he whispered in his heart, "I will ascend above the stars of God. I will sit on the Mount of Assembly. I will be like the Most High." That thought, born in silence, birthed a war that has never ended. Isaiah and Ezekiel saw the truth. They described the fall of this celestial king. His throne turned to ash, his wisdom to deceit, his worship to blasphemy. Once a guardian of God's own presence, now cast out. Lucifer, the light-bearer, became Satan, the adversary. But he didn't fall alone. His rebellion seduced a third of the stars, a third of the heavenly host. This was not a skirmish. It was cosmic treason, and the angels who followed him did so with eyes wide open. They believed a lie that they could become gods, and in that belief, they sealed their fate. Michael rose in response. The archangel of war led heaven's forces against the dragon and his fallen horde. There was no negotiation, no debate, only battle. The skies split. The power of God thundered, and Satan fell like lightning. But don't mistake this defeat for disappearance. The war didn't end. It moved. It descended into our realm. The battlefield shifted from the heavens to Earth. And humanity? We were the next frontier. The enemy's eyes were set. His plan began. And we, made in the image of God, would soon find ourselves in the center of a conflict that was never ours, but would become ours forever. The garden was never just a paradise. It was a war zone disguised in beauty. When Adam opened his eyes and Eve took her first breath, the serpent was already there. Ancient, intelligent, and filled with a hatred forged in the flames of heaven's justice. This wasn't just a snake. This was the fallen one, cloaked in deception. His tactics hadn't changed. He didn't need to create evil. He only needed to twist truth. Did God really say? With that question, he introduced doubt. And where there is doubt, rebellion is always close. He offered knowledge, power, independence. The same lie he whispered in heaven, now repackaged for man. And they took it. They bit into the promise of divinity without obedience, of power without process. And in that bite, the doors to a new phase of cosmic conflict swung open. Man was no longer a passive creation. Man was now a combatant, caught between light and darkness. But even in the fall, heaven did not abandon earth. God's presence remained. His purpose endured. And the Watchers were deployed, celestial agents loyal and silent, sent to observe, to guard, to report. They were not to interfere, only to watch. But watching would not be enough, because something darker was coming, something that would not merely tempt man, but alter him. Something that would not just deceive, but corrupt the very bloodline of humanity. The Watchers were about to be tested, not by war, but by desire. This wasn't a failure of orders. It was a failure of hearts. And when the boundary between heaven and earth was crossed again, the consequences would change history. Do you feel the weight of this yet? You should, because the story you thought you knew is only just beginning. They were supposed to be guardians, sentinels of light stationed to protect, to observe, to honor the divine command. But curiosity became fascination. Fascination became longing. And longing opened the door to a fall more devastating than the first. The Watchers looked down on humanity, not with contempt, but with desire. They saw beauty in what was meant to be guided, not touched. And under the leadership of one called Semjaza, they made a pact, a covenant of rebellion. If they were to fall, they would fall together. and fall they did. They descended not just in spirit but in flesh. They took wives among the daughters of men, and from this unholy union something monstrous was born. Nephilim, giants, hybrids, beings not meant to exist. Beings who blurred the lines between heaven and earth. They were mighty, they were brilliant, they were destructive. Possessing the strength of angels and the instincts of men, they dominated early civilization. They taught forbidden knowledge, alchemy, war, seduction, sorcery. What should have been slow human growth became a surge of corruption. The earth groaned. Violence spread like fire. Blood cried out from the soil. And heaven listened. But judgment would not be rushed. The watchers were chained in darkness. The Nephilim roamed free, for a time. You see, evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it teaches. Sometimes it builds temples and writes songs. But underneath, it decays the soul. And that decay, once it starts, never stays contained. This wasn't mythology. This was history. A history buried beneath floodwaters and sealed behind silence. Until now. They walked like gods among men, these hybrid beings, the Nephilim. Their presence was overwhelming, their intellect otherworldly, their strength immeasurable. Cities were built in their honor, wars were fought at their command, and songs were sung that told not of human love or struggle, but of conquest, domination, and fear. The people bowed, not because they believed, but because they had no choice. These were not saviors. They were anomalies, cracks in the natural order. Their very existence was a violation of divine law. And still, they thrived, consuming more, controlling more, infecting the heart of humanity with the arrogance and hunger of their fallen fathers. With every passing generation, man lost his innocence and replaced it with ambition forged in unnatural fire. They desecrated everything sacred. Altars once meant for worship became centers of blood rituals. Temples became thrones of blasphemy. Even nature recoiled. Animals once peaceful grew restless and violent. The air changed. The soil soured. Something deep and primal in creation knew it had been contaminated. But perhaps the worst corruption wasn't in the blood or the land. It was in the heart. Humanity began to love its chains. They revered the giants. They welcomed the darkness, mistaking it for power, mistaking the supernatural for the divine. Their memories dimmed. Their songs forgot the Creator. Their myths replaced the truth. And as this shadow spread, a decision was made. Heaven would not allow the infection to reach beyond redemption. The flood was not vengeance. It was mercy with a sharp edge, a reset, a reckoning, a chance for the bloodline of man to breathe clean again. But before the waters came, a message had to be delivered. One final warning. Enoch, the man who walked with God, was chosen, not a prophet of doom, but of deliverance. He was the voice between realms, speaking judgment to the watchers and hope to the faithful. He declared their fate, bound in chains, buried in darkness, their offspring destined for obliteration. And then, he vanished, taken, not dead, removed before the storm. But the storm did come, and when it came, it wasn't just rain. It was fury. It was heaven crashing down upon a corrupted earth. The waters rose and the giants drowned, and the memory of them, twisted and half-true, would echo through myth, legend, and nightmare for millennia. The flood wasn't the end. It was a reset button. A sacred cleansing, yes, but it did not erase all consequences. Shadows do not die. They wait. And so, in the silence that followed, as Noah's descendants repopulated the earth, something ancient stirred again beneath the surface. The stories of the Nephilim didn't vanish. They evolved. Civilizations that rose after the flood carried fragments of the memory, distorted by fear and time. From Mesopotamian tablets to Greek epics, from Norse sagas to Mesoamerican lore, tales of demigods, giants, and sky beings flourished. The echoes of rebellion were too loud to be silenced. And why should they be? Evil knows how to hide in story. It wraps itself in metaphor, embeds itself in culture until we no longer question its origin. We worship the symbols, oblivious to the source. We call them heroes, titans, or protectors. But what if they were the same abominations that once nearly destroyed the world? The enemy is cunning. He doesn't need to be believed. He only needs to be remembered in the wrong way. through pride, through legend, through half-truths spoken around fires and written in epic poems. And so the door cracked open once again, slowly, subtly, relentlessly. It began with worship, not of the Creator, but of the created. Men began to build towers that reached for heaven. Kingdoms were built on blood. The divine image in humanity was buried beneath the hunger for glory and power. And in that soil, evil found fertile ground once more. You see, the flood reset the earth, but not the war. It never ended, it only changed form. And the Watchers, though bound, had successors. Spirits that still whispered, still influenced, still corrupted. And the Nephilim, they too would return. Lesser perhaps, but no less deadly. Ghosts of giants, remnants of rebellion. The world did not become safe, it became distracted. And in that distraction, the old patterns repeated. The ancient war, quiet but ever present, wove itself once more into the heartbeat of mankind. Now hear this. There is more than one fall. Lucifer's rebellion was the first. The Watcher's descent was the second. But a third fall was creeping through human civilization. The fall of man's memory. Forgetting who we are. Forgetting who we serve. Forgetting what lurks beyond the veil. When you forget truth, you're not free. You're vulnerable. And into that vulnerability came manipulation. The enemy did not need to roar. He only had to whisper. Lies became doctrine. Rituals replaced relationship. Power replaced purity. And religion itself became a weapon in the wrong hands. High places were built. Shrines rose again. But they weren't directed at the Most High. They were aimed at stars, spirits, idols, beings that promised favor, fortune, fertility. In reality, they were ancient rebels wearing new names. Baal, Molech, Ishtar. These weren't just false gods. They were echoes of a rebellion older than mankind. Blood returned to the altars. This time not from animals, but from children. Yes, sacrifice. Systems of worship that demanded death, not life. That praised destruction, not restoration. The war had found a new rhythm, one that sounded like music, but pulsed with madness. And people danced to it, but not everyone forgot. A remnant remained, those who still remembered Eden, who still heard the whispers of the garden, the warnings of Enoch, the thunder of the flood. These weren't perfect people. They were seekers, survivors, carriers of a truth the world was trying to bury. And it is through them that light would rise again, through prophets and patriarchs, through those who heard the voice of the divine, even when the world screamed louder. They were not many, but they were enough, because truth doesn't need an army. It needs a witness. And you reading this, hearing this, feeling this, you are part of that witness now. Don't look away. Don't dismiss this as myth. This is your history, your inheritance, and your war, too. But to fight a war, you must know your enemy, not by name alone, but by origin, by nature, by strategy. The enemy of your soul is ancient. He doesn't need to invent new weapons. He only needs to sharpen the old ones. Pride, lust, fear, doubt. These are the swords he wields best. He doesn't attack your body first. He attacks your identity. He whispers, "You are not enough. You are forgotten. You are alone." And when those lies take root, you begin to live like they're true. That's the battle. Not in the flesh, but in the mind, in the heart. That's why understanding the celestial war matters. Because your depression may not be chemical. Your anxiety may not be circumstantial. Your battles might be symptoms of a deeper conflict, a spiritual one. And once you see it for what it is, you can finally fight back with the right weapons. The word, the blood, the name. The authority granted to you not by religion but by relationship. You are not a spectator in this war. You are a soldier. And soldiers don't retreat. They rise. They remember who they are, whose image they carry, whose breath fills their lungs. The giants are returning, not in form but in influence, through ideologies, systems, technologies that promise enlightenment but deliver bondage. If you don't see it, it's because you've been lulled to sleep. But if you do see it, wake someone else. Sound the alarm. You were born into a battlefield. You don't get to opt out, but you do get to choose your side. So choose, with your life, with your loyalty, with your legacy, because neutrality, is surrender in disguise. And if you're still here, still reading, still listening, you've already been called. Now it's time to answer. The enemy's plan has always been infiltration, not invasion. He doesn't storm the gates. He gets invited in. Through art, through politics, through promises of utopia that rot from the inside. And behind every golden ideal, there's a shadow. That's how empires fall, not from fire, but from forgetfulness. In the days of Nimrod, men gathered not to worship, but to rise. They built a tower to touch the heavens, not in reverence, but in defiance. It was never about reaching God. It was about replacing him. Babel wasn't just a construction site. It was a rebellion carved in stone. And God scattered them, not in rage, but in mercy. He divided the languages to protect the plan, because unified rebellion would have brought another judgment. Instead, he slowed the decay, redirected the narrative, and chose a man through whom he would start again, Abram, who became Abraham. Through this man, a nation was born, a people meant to be a light in the darkness. But even they, chosen and anointed, fell into old patterns. They made golden calves. They sacrificed to foreign gods. They forgot who delivered them, again and again, because the war was still raging and the enemy was still whispering. But the plan never changed. Through this flawed nation came prophets, came promises, came covenants etched in stone and blood, and every shadow that tried to destroy them only confirmed that something greater was coming, something the enemy could delay, but never stop. And when that moment came, when the Word became flesh, the war reached its climax, not with an army, not with thunder, but with a baby in a manger and a cross on a hill. The rebellion had weaponized death, but the Creator turned it into the doorway back to life. Everything before pointed to that. Everything after flows from it. And you're living in the aftermath of that decisive victory. But don't be fooled. Just because the war is won doesn't mean the battle is over. You now stand in the crossfire between two unseen realms. Every decision, every desire, every distraction is either aligning you with light or pulling you into shadow. The world calls it personal choice. Heaven calls it warfare. And hell? Hell calls it opportunity. We dress our idols in modern clothes now. They're not carved from stone. They're broadcast in high definition. They don't demand sacrifice. They promise success. But the spirit behind them hasn't changed. The deception is the same. Only the packaging has evolved. Technology, sexuality, self-worship, relativism. These are not advancements. They are altars. And the blood spilled is invisible but just as real. Fractured families, mental breakdowns, spiritual apathy, generational curses. We are feeding giants again. Not with lambs, but with our own identities. But here's the truth. The enemy doesn't want you to remember. Your DNA carries divine design. You were made to rule, not be ruled. To govern, not be governed by fear or shame or the seductive voice of comfort. You were formed in fire, anointed for impact. You were born after the cross. That means you were born into power. You don't beg for victory, you enforce it. You don't chase purpose, you walk in it. The same spirit that raised Christ lives in you. Not metaphorically, literally. And that changes everything. So stop waiting. Stop questioning whether you're qualified. You wouldn't be here reading this if heaven didn't already say yes over your life. The war still rages. But now you know the weapons. Now you've seen the battlefield. Now it's time to move. Because complacency is agreement with the enemy. But obedience is war. The battlefield isn't just global. It's personal. It's your house, your habits, your hidden thoughts. The giants don't just rise in cities. They rise in screens, in silence, in bitterness left unchecked, in wounds that never healed. And the only way to defeat them is to expose them. You don't need more motivation. You need revelation. You need to see that your private battles are spiritual indicators. If the enemy is attacking you hard, it's because you carry something dangerous to his agenda. The attack is evidence of your assignment. So fight, not with your fists, with your faith, with your words, with your worship. Speak life when death circles you. Declare truth when lies press in. Fast, pray, seek, stand. Because giants don't fall to noise, they fall to authority. And your authority doesn't come from your performance. It comes from your position, seated with Christ in heavenly places. Far above every principality and power. That's not religious poetry, that's your reality. But only if you walk in it. Don't wait for perfect conditions. You won't get them. The world is groaning. Time is collapsing. Lines are being drawn in the sand. And silence is not neutrality. It's surrender. Speak up. Stand out. Be unshakable. Be bold. Because the world doesn't need another influencer. It needs a voice of truth. Someone who knows the ancient war and carries the eternal flame. Someone who lives not for comfort, but for calling. That someone is you. You were never meant to be normal. Heaven doesn't do average. When God formed you, He wasn't trying to blend you in. He was setting you apart. You are a divine disruption in a dark system. A living contradiction to every statistic, every generational curse, every lie whispered over your bloodline. But the war wants you tired, distracted, numb. It wants you scrolling, comparing, questioning your worth. Because if you ever woke up to who you are, if you ever remembered, you'd burn too bright to ignore. So here's your reminder. You are royal. You are strategic. You are dangerous to the darkness. Every breath you take is an act of defiance against the enemy's plan. Every time you choose holiness over habit, love over lust, faith over fear, you win a battle most never see. And yet, you weren't just called to survive. You were called to reclaim, to take ground, to lead others out of the confusion and into clarity. You are not just a warrior. You are a revealer, a forerunner, a torchbearer in this final age. There are people tied to your obedience, generations linked to your yes, doors that won't open until you knock, battles that won't shift until you speak. The heavens are waiting, the earth is groaning, and you, yes you, have a role in the story. This is your hour, not tomorrow, not when you feel ready. Now, you've been equipped, you've been chosen, you've been warned, and now, you've been awakened. So rise. This isn't just ancient history. It's your reality. The war that started in heaven is still shaping your life today. But now you see it for what it is. You were born with purpose, forged for impact, and chosen for this generation. Don't waste it. Subscribe to the channel, follow Jesus with everything, and walk boldly in the authority you now carry. I'm Oliver, and it's my calling to remind you who you really are. You're not alone in this. Stay close, stay sharp, and stay on fire. Until next time, grace, strength, and all my heart go with you.